Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Montgomery, and I'll be your host for this session of New Cyber Frontier. Today, we have a gentleman from NATO. I'll let him introduce himself and give him a little bit of his background here, and maybe we can get into cybersecurity and the profession of it and some of those concerns. So, sir, if you will.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So, hello from Belgium. My name is Holger Spohn. I was a former German Air Force officer, left the military, joined NATO as a NATO civilian, and now I'm working in the cybersecurity field for nearly 20 years. So next year, hitting the 20 outside the military time. And it was quite an interesting experience, and it keeps going as we see with new challenges, new demands, new requirements. And I think we never run out of a job if it continues like this.
Right about that. No, definitely. I think the industry is ongoing, and the gap just seems to be outrunning us, right? So it gets bigger every year, it seems like, in the analysis that we end up seeing every year. So I see statistics from ISC Squared. They usually give off some statistics. There's some other sites out there, but I usually see that published paper. They give out a white paper every year. So I'm not sure what you're on your end, what you see, but so I mean, that's one of the biggest factors about our cybersecurity industry as far as the challenge goes is filling the spots. I mean, do you see that in NATO too, having some of those constraints? I'm sure you do.
As we rely on the people that are coming from the nations, I would say at the moment the nations are challenged with a qualified workforce. I agree.
Yeah.
There's one big challenge that the military, and some countries are a good example, has a hard time keeping the workforce because industry pays more. And with that, of course, people then have usually the loyalty where the money is. Yeah. And the constant training requirements challenge, of course, public employees. So we normally should see trained personnel incoming. And as training becomes more complex, more demanding, more expensive, that, of course, is a challenge in itself. And to also, I would say, motivate the people to maybe join this workforce is difficult. We try to, I mean, not we, but the nations try to, and I'm sure in the US you have the same, since university, to train the young workforce and to bring in the experts and to make sure there's an incentive to join. But it seems the technology and the problems outrace at the moment the recruitment, the training, and actually the efforts to fill those gaps. I believe in Black Hat this year, we heard the statistics that in the US, over 2 million experts are basically missing. And I would dare to say that delta is growing, and not only in the US, in Belgium, where I sit at the moment. I believe the Belgian government a few years ago said that they do not have enough experts in alone a country of 10 million people. So in the long run, it raises the question on how do you expect to deal with this if you can't satisfy your requirement on the workforce? Will automation, or maybe, I know it's an industry buzzword at the moment, but machine learning or artificial intelligence at some point fill the gap and free up some humans to do what really matters?
Yeah, that's normal. I think that's what we're hoping for in industry, something that helps kind of close that gap as far as other than throwing a lot of people at it, right? So and so I suspect that what other concerns do you think is in the industry as far as NATO is concerned? I know that you got threat nations, you got different actors out there. I'm sure those are rogue nations, things like that seem to be taking more of a foreground as far as attacks go. I mean, is that another prospect behind? I'm sure it is behind NATO. As we in the United States, we tend to see more threat actors evolving from different countries that we've never seen before, and taking bigger participants in attacks. I mean, just the ransomware itself and that concept seems like that's taken on a new genre, a new agenda as far as hacking. So, I mean, what are some of the takes or perspective from your angle that you see is coming into the industry that might be a concern to us as a profession?
I think we are not different than any either government or any company. The complexity and the growing complexity of technology, everybody wants to talk to everybody in best real time, highest quality with like any device.
Yeah.
And that to secure is, first of all, nearly impossible. And I mean, the US is the best example how to prevent data leakage when it really matters. That is a huge challenge, be it the military, be it a civilian environment. You want to talk to industry, you want to talk to academia. There is a need to talk and there is a need to exchange. But at the same time, keeping your own environment, your assets, your people secure, that is a huge challenge. As you mentioned, ransomware, I think at the moment, the merging of cyber crime as well as state level activity or more sophisticated actor activity, which is out there because the criminal gangs are getting better as well.
Yeah,
that is a huge problem because ransomware is a problem for everybody. It might not be aimed at you, but it might hit you. And then you have the problem like the big companies where we saw recent success stories, unfortunately, like Garmin, or in Germany, I think it was MediaMarkt, which was successfully affected and disabled some of the services. So that the merging of this, unfortunately, Corona, I believe, led to an interesting technology exchange between the malicious actors because they couldn't go out, they couldn't act as they normally do.
Yeah.
So they started learning from each other, sharing best practices, TTPs. And I believe at the moment, that is part of what we see. That was successful. And that is where the advanced threats come from in technology. Fileless malware was big a couple of years ago. Now it's becoming a masterpiece. The ransomware evolved from, like in the past, it was encrypt your data. Maybe you get it back if you're lucky. If not, you paid a little bit of money. Yeah. Now you are pressured into payment with they take data before they encrypt your network and the storage to either shame and leak or to make sure, oh, you didn't get ransomware. Let me show you your information and now rethink your answer. And at that moment, there is a big problem. And unfortunately, when law enforcement tells companies not to pay, I fully understand the point. But the small to medium-sized companies, which can basically hold barely their own with the IT department, what are they supposed to do? And if you struggle in securing your technology, or better, there's never change a running system. When you have an improper setup and also your backup was affected, there is basically no real other choice. And I'm not saying payment is correct, but you see when even bigger companies pay a ransom, or better, it is indicated through a quick return into the market that they must have paid, then this shows that unfortunately the business model at the moment is successful.
Yeah, you're right. Well, we're going to need to take a break real quick. So we'll be right back after we hear from our sponsors.
Blockframe Technology offers next-generation blockchain managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. I'm your host, Tim Montgomery. I'm here with Holger, who works for the NATO community and looks like he's out of shape. We're Brussels, close to Brussels there. And we were talking about before the break, the reality of just what, the consensus of the way I think our world has become after COVID, the hacker and just how advanced they seem to have gotten from the concepts, from what they're seeing in perspective. And I think you're right on the tick when it comes to the concept behind, hackers and the evolution of hacking and just how it's got more predominantly focused. Ransomware is one of the bigger components, and they're going after bigger stabs of loot, right? So they're asking for more prominent, deleting things. And it's just a different perspective to hear that COVID is actually almost inspired them kind of conversing together and be able to. I haven't heard that perspective yet, so that's something that's I believe it probably did happen. Probably is something that they probably did have an opportunity to get into and see that, like VPN, because I mean half the nation went home, or more than half the nations. Most nations, they had to send all the workers home. They had to figure out how to adapt to this thing within days versus months. And you had industry who probably had big projects on the plate that were going to do it, but now they have to do it. And so how does that work? How do you rapidly expand the teleworking process out to 90, 100% of your workers? So just that alone created a giant vector, a giant gaping hole as to, being able to do work versus a hacker being able to get to and use something like ransomware. So certainly had a big change in the way we did business. I know from what I do every day that I get a chance to go home. I've never had that chance. I always usually drive in an hour's work to go to work. But it did open that up, and we were ready for that. I think a lot of what we do is government, as far as what I do, is more remote than any. So they just hardened it more than it was already given. And so like my wife, she works for a well-known hospital, and she had to watch it expand rapidly. But what they did do is they took the money they were going to put into renting buildings and literally left their IT staff at home permanently, and then took that money from their future efforts and put it into what they were going to do already to rent the building out. So they ended up saving money. But they got attacked by ransomware and things like that too. So, I mean, so the benefit to something like this per hacker, the idea behind it is just enormous. And so in your world, in your perspective, how did you see how your business is? How did it trend with market, with the ability to do business every day? Were there focal points to how the attacks happen, how you saw the evolution of this, how business modernized? I mean, what were some of the key factors that you saw as we went through this process of going all telework, right?
As we are not really, I mean, with a military background, it's not really about the business model. It was actually the attempt to protect the people, and of course to reduce the manpower and the footprint in the different buildings and headquarters.
Okay.
We had the same task like industry, send people home, make sure they can work. And of course, here is the big difference. This working from home, of course, for a military or a government employee is different than industry, because as soon as you talk about more sensitive information, this working from home doesn't work anyway. And it never did. Exactly, the skiff model, and most people do not have a skiff back home. So it it caused problems. Of course, the big expansion rapidly on IT was a challenge, because you see that now even procurement of IT is difficult. One is the supply chain, or the supply chain problem. The second, of course, is the huge demand across the world, which I think nobody could foresee at some point. And when even big companies like HP or Dell have problems shipping out new devices, and then you need to configure while half of the stuff is at home, you need to think about new security. You need to roll out whatever you use, be it VPNs, be it tokens, be it some kind of security countermeasure. And that was, I believe, we are not different than any other environment in trying to master this. At the same time, while basically people are already being sent home, you want to train them. And we all saw in the news the disasters on some Zoom bombed meetings, school kids exposed to pornography. We had, of course, here, We have people in school, we have families around, and they suddenly needed to worry at home. How can I do telework? How can I do telestudy for my children? How do I secure that? Then you hear, oh, Zoom is not secure. Then is Microsoft Teams better? Is Cisco WebEx better? And all the platforms that suddenly appeared, GoToMeeting, etc. And that posed an interesting challenge. And unfortunately, I think it still is, because we just try to unravel the chaos, and what comes back, the fourth wave, and people start going home again.
Yeah, you're right. And it transfers in the same sort of ways here when it come down to really trying to find those platforms, mechanisms that were secure enough, and then for it to unfold that fast. And then how do you deal with when you come home? Because interesting enough, with those who have kids that are younger ages, need that support, and then they're getting sent home. It's a juggling act to be the parent, also be the teacher, and then then work at home simultaneously. I'm sure not everybody has a space in their home, just that alone, right? Let alone the IT and the cybersecurity component of this, the impact that it had. So yeah, interesting ways and the vectors of how threats have started to be new. Do you see any other threats? I mean, as far as the threat actor itself, see anything new trending as far as the way COVID, when it started happening, that you saw that was different about when you any of the threats you guys gained over there? So the threat actor changed. It started doing different possibilities of different attacks. Besides the fact of the VPN, those are the biggest factors. So I'm sure you were also vulnerable to other things that you ended up seeing in of course, whatever reports you're gaining and whatever activities that are going on that you're monitoring. So did you see any other factors that were actually like gaining as far as hacking goes, or contributing factors of attacks in your modeling that you did?
I was about to mention, of course, the VPN problem. So basically anything you exposed to the outside world suddenly became a problem, and VPN exploits, which I believe in the past didn't really play a big role, now suddenly became a dominant problem, even on more sophisticated threat actor level. Then suddenly there was a chaining of events. I mean, we of course all looked at the different problems we had with the attacks against cloud, the Office 365 and Exchange vulnerabilities, which suddenly posed a problem. So a lot of people believe cloud might be their savior. Suddenly it was affected by this. We saw this year, for example, in Black Hat, that it is not meant maliciously from the cloud providers, but if you don't have a full control of your environment and the provider rolls out a new service which is put on top of what you are already using, first of all, it's like a Microsoft patch. You cannot prevent it. Second of all, you might not be even aware that they roll out a new service, and that this new service then technically poses a challenge for you when you configured everything safe and secure, and when malicious activities don't even appear in the logs, because this is not what the logs and what the environment is actually monitoring. That and then poses an interesting challenge too. And I quote one of the security researchers who actually delivered that presentation, that without having anything like a CVE record for cloud vulnerabilities, or any common way to share the different cloud environments, be it from Microsoft to AWS to others, what vulnerabilities you're actually facing, in case the company even knows or wants to reveal this. So I think this whole trend towards cloud and the simple belief this will make everything better, I believe is for me personally a huge concern, because cloud, yes, it can help if you understand the model, if you understand the environment, but it is not the general savior for everything, apart from the legal constraints where data is stored, third-party access, etc., etc. But the cloud concerns, I believe, became bigger because this was part of also a countermeasure to Corona. How can I make sure? Look at Microsoft Teams. I'm sure a lot of users stored some information in Microsoft Azure, so behind Teams, supporting meetings, making a living working document for their peers, be it school, be it work, be it a hobby. And do we all clean this up? Do we review the information? What happens? And that was actually something we wanted to do now when this unraveling from the chaos. At least tell people, come back to the normal, come back to a controlled environment, delete the stuff you don't need, which is out there, or bring it back to an environment, I would say, that you trust. And I hope that can still happen because, like I just said, now with the fourth wave and some countries taking new countermeasures, we will see.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. What did Microsoft do as far as its own policies to make sure that information was maintained and clean? So that's something. And then, of course, then we talk about the geographical location of said information as far as where it's being collected. So, I mean, those are certainly concerns I'm sure that everyone should have on their radar as far as the amount of collaboration on these systems that we've had to go to. And cloud is not the answer to everything, although they say by the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to have about half of all of our data in the cloud somewhere. So I'm not quite sure exactly what that might mean, but unless you're collecting it on my computer and putting it somewhere else, I'm not going there if I can help it. So the OneDrive is something that keeps being entertained by Microsoft wanting me to back up stuff, and I don't want to use it. I've got my own backups in those cases, so certainly can understand there's concerns there. And so as we got into COVID and transversing into new methods, the concept behind the threat that it imposes and the cloud concept and then threat imposes. I mean, as far as future proofing, is there anything that you could think of as far as your experiences that might suffice a good method for future proofing such a thing like when you go to the cloud, and then in such a measure, like the big velocity of different information being on a platform where collaborating. I'm sure Microsoft's got their idea of what they're going to do, but from your perspective, I mean, as you see, especially if you're doing military ops or if you're doing something like that, I'm sure they have their own set of like NATO has its own interior components that it goes to safeguard itself. But as far as cloud conversing and things like that, I think what's your perspective on safeguarding the future proofing of cloud itself when it comes down to international concerns or even information that's actually should be prioritized, like classified information?
Good question, complex question. I believe we leave I have to mention the buzzwords because it is a concern somewhere on the horizon. Yeah. What will at some point quantum computing and the post-quantum encryption do to us? Because my initial answer would be encrypt the data that you have in the cloud. I know it counters the effort of big data, and the data cannot be really processed while in the cloud, while being encrypted. But I believe that is right now the solution, and this is also future-proofing it, because with that, you could, with a strong encryption algorithm, say, I don't really care initially even where the data is, as long as I can access it. Yeah. And as long as it's decrypted when it sits in my secure environment, now assuming I control a secure environment, then I can say I also don't care what happens in transit, because this is something we cannot overlook. Yeah. And this model, I think we could even, and we see that with simple encryption tools that are sometimes part of an anti-malware suite, or you now see encrypted USB sticks for home use. That might even be a solution to, as you just said, to your OneDrive problem. If private users want to share something and it's a little bit more sensitive, from a tax declaration to maybe family pictures, kids' pictures, that this doesn't get into the wrong hands, encrypt it, put it in your OneDrive folder. As long as you keep the key, and the key is somehow resident, even if your machine crashes or you have a fire in the house and it burns down your laptop, then this for me is actually the solution. And that allows you traveling, you go to the new location, authenticate to your data, and there you go, you're back operational. Now, of course, raises the question, if you authenticate from an internet cafe, then you don't control the environment. So you need to think about it and still play with it. But imagine for the military, you go from one command to another, there is a secure network, and you then re-authenticate to your information and continue working. Yeah. That, I believe, is a fairly easy and good way forward. The problem, of course, is what will your data do while sitting in the cloud? It's not gaining value, and it cannot be exploited. So we have to balance what do you want to do also with big data models and data analytics.
Yeah, you're right about that. That's certainly true. Have you ever heard of using blockchain to encrypt the data itself?
Yes, heard about it. And I find the blockchain models and the technology and the opportunities it gives quite fascinating, not only when looking at cryptocurrencies, but also, as you just said, securing information via a blockchain process. Best example, what I find fascinating is if you have famous antiques or famous art, and to make sure that this piece of art, of course, only exists once, and that you can always track and trace where it was last and where the last legal owner and its location was, which I know if there's a criminal and you have enough money and you manage to steal, you might not care that there is a blockchain proof of this is the original picture. Right. But in general, I think it would help in securing a lot of the information that we need to maybe minimize theft of art or trying to prevent forgery and similar models.
Yeah, there was a concept that the gentleman in one of the previous shows we've had that talked about using it to actually trigger rule sets that followed the data itself. So you could encrypt the data, and inside the encryption, you would have the rule set of what you could and couldn't do, which would limit the use of data, even if it was setting, stagnant somewhere. It still couldn't be. You still couldn't get to it, and it would only do so many things. You can limit it, which was an interesting concept to me. That would, I think, in turn, that would actually solve a lot of the issues where data in the cloud perspectives and concerns would come into play. And he had a working model of what he was using to actually do this blockchain aspect of it. Have you ever heard of anything similar to that in your experiences in NATO of coming across something like that?
I believe a couple of years ago in an academic research presentation, I believe this was envisioned or potential model, but I must admit I haven't seen it live or haven't seen a working model, or haven't even had the chance to, let's say, play with it. At the moment, we all talk about data-centric security, and that security travels with the data. And then, of course, the roles and functions travel with this data segment as well. But as we look at the system, even the one I'm sitting in front of, a Microsoft Windows 10 or 11 is so far away from data-centric security. So we have to come up with a simple way to implement this for the normal user to use and understand and to embrace this. But this sounds like an interesting model, I must say, or an interesting use of technology.
Yeah, that's what I was. I was just curious. More or less, I saw it, but I haven't seen anything working either as far as models go. But he had something that he was using and writing about it, and in his research on use of blockchain and what it could do. I know we do the same similar things. We just use it to encrypt data versus and the access of data versus like your crypto currency and things of that nature. That doesn't fall into the lane of what we're doing as blockchain development, but per se, it's something that I think is in the works to support ongoing, furthering information in the cloud, and it will help to secure data wherever it goes, and hopefully that'll flush out the security of the internet itself at some point, and help support ongoing things that in military operations and things like that. So, so I guess let's see. Going to take a break here. I was trying to think of the time frame. Sorry about that. So we're going to take a little break, and we will return right after we hear from our sponsors. Thank you.
Blockframe Technology offers next-generation blockchain-managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Okay, welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. I'm your host, Tim Montgomery. I'm here with Holger, individual from NATO, speaking about the cloud and concerns that he has and has known in the past, and about COVID. Some of the topics that we were going over is just how things have changed in everyday work as far as cybersecurity and what it relates to our activities every day. I mean, do you see concerns also, sir, that like when you go to market or you go to buy something in the NATO, I guess in European nations as a whole, what's the trending changes there that you see that might provide a concern as far as avenues for a hacker to get in and do something? How's that? I mean, how do you, what's your perspective on that?
Highly interesting environment, and we leave the nation out, but I believe we talked about it, the education and mastering the complexity of technology. We have to mention, of course, the fascination at the moment of 5G and rolling out new technologies.
Yeah, that was
and suddenly coming to the conclusion, and I think in the US government at the moment, this has highest level priority and is on the agenda of the White House, that we are highly dependent, of course, in components on Asia, and not saying that everything with that is. I'm not into the doom and gloom scenario and that the sky is falling, but an understanding has to be made that if I control the hardware platform and the hardware components that form the core of either my IT or my country or my critical infrastructure, then I have a problem if everything that is manufactured and produced and maybe even programmed is outside my control. Because validating this is difficult to impossible, very, very expensive. And I can quote a nation in Europe. They had been on the news with this, and they just said, then we put security around our information. We talked about it before. That works. If I encrypt the data over a 5G network, that is fine. But if I control the hardware platform, the underlying environment, I will make sure that I then at least take your data with the encryption, and at some point in time, as you know, with enough computing power, enough time, enough resources, I might even break that, and with that have access to the information. So this is not a quick way out and to dismiss the threat. The recognition even failed that if I don't own the hardware layer, so to say, that this poses an interesting challenge and one that is not easily overcome. And so I believe at the moment, the recognition on not only the shortfalls in the supply chain, but maybe the problem of giving everything to other countries, from the production, like I said, to the design, to the development, to the programming of software in many cases, or at least core components. That was a mistake, and this will be very expensive and difficult to roll back if we can even succeed to do so.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That is a major concern as far as the hardware goes. Just the fact that they've reverse engineered most stuff, but that if you end up with hardware that they own, then you kind of let that be a monopoly per se, and that there's no contending with that. So especially if there's an outside source, so everyone's always acting as far as skepticism, if you're always letting a third party do the job for you. Are they going to do what they're supposed to do as they agreed to and continuously do that? So, yeah. And it sounds like the more we get into this, the more we become dependent on it, it seems like the more changes are being made. So it's definitely something that's going to be unique coming as far as concerns go. So,
and we saw some examples like that when already laptops got rolled out from big manufacturers and they had software which phoned home.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
just, okay, later it was excused, that shouldn't happen, or we forgot it on there. Did you really forget it, or was it just found and you made a little oopsie and had to try to unravel from that? So that is, for me, a huge concern. The hunger for the information, not necessarily big data, but I just recently read an interesting article where in China, the whole artificial intelligence and the whole scientific research is basically learning from all the information China has gathered across the world and keeps gathering. And apparently, the smarter the AI becomes, the more data it needs to study. And so we need to understand this. There is a reason for, not only for the criminals, but also for producers of this type of technology, or maybe even for other governments, that the data hunger will not stop.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's fundamentally going to grow exponentially. And it's certainly, with AI being out there and the amount of information trying to consume. Yeah, it's just certainly, it sounds like a monster almost, right? You're creating the Frankenstein, if you will, or inevitably I guess you could call it the Terminator, right? So that story about Skynet coming over and taking us over, right? So yeah, certainly concerned. I certainly see that coming in the future too. Well, sir, it was great chatting with you. I hope we covered some of the topics. Is there anything else you'd like to chat about that I might not have covered, or any angle that perspective wise? As we got a little bit of time here, but we're getting to the end. We're running out of time. So is there anything you'd like to cover other than that?
Maybe just to finish the whole AI discussion, I think President Putin a couple months ago, or it was maybe more than a couple months, so last year or the year before, actually said to the press that, and we aren't there yet. So the true AI, as we understand it, with its own analytics, its own decision making, and basically changing the course of an event for mission success, is, as far as I think we know at the moment, not invented yet, luckily. But he stated clearly that those who will control a true AI will rule the planet. And that, I think, is a perspective which is really true, because once you develop this, and I know this is a little bit going into the fear-mongering piece, but the efforts are ongoing. We see this from Microsoft, we see it from Facebook or Meta now, we see it from all the big companies, and they all strive to a true AI development. And yes, it will help us in space if a robot can make its own decision, analyze the parameters, and not rely on programming. That is amazing. But what will it do in other environments? And so here, President Putin's statement is fascinating. And I believe this explains it also, why a lot of entities believe they cannot afford to give up or to lose this race. And that's, I think, also a biggest challenge, because it basically forces you into, we have to play and at least try. It's like playing the lottery. If you don't play, you don't win. There's not even a chance. But playing might lead to success.
No, you're right about that, because eventually, yes, an AI will stand out, one in particular, whatever it is, even if they're diverse ones, multiples, they eventually, will be trying to rule out which one will do better, and with data and the new way of doing things. So our world is always revolving, changing. Seems crazy the way IT is spun out, and the way now the focus of the cybersecurity community is now, having to worry about specific types of targets like these, and how just the impact of these little things seem to make a world of difference today in our world of being able to just commute and go to work and buy products, market, and just live in particular. So definitely some challenges out there. Definitely intriguing, and the concept behind not having enough individuals to support. Hopefully AI supports trending for us to be able to close that gap up a little bit, right? So
look at a couple of years ago. I think it was also in Las Vegas when DARPA tested the machines attacking and defending a network. And I think this was an interesting experiment, fascinating to see, but really showing where the trend is going. Yes, the good intent is free up the humans and leave the mundane tasks to the machines.
yeah,
But where will be the end of it? And I mean, Hollywood, unfortunately, every good sci-fi movie starts like this. Oh, the humans are not bothered with this, just the machines. And it goes downhill from there.
yeah, because then the weakest link is the human now, and what's the point of, it just goes in the cycle. At least you get to that evolution somewhere in the midst of the climax of the movie, right? So at some point in those sci-fi movies. So and I know it's more of a joking tone, but sci-fi movies become realistic at some point. I don't know if I've got giant spiders coming out of space and aliens and all that good stuff, but AI is certainly one of those you need to be watching out for as far as concerns. That seems to have come out of the sci-fi end of it, right? So, well, sir, thank you for chatting with us, and I hope you enjoyed it, and it was great to meet you. I hope we get a chance to do this again sometime. It's certainly good to hear perspectives out of the NATO community, and it's always worthwhile to hear from anybody in the cybersecurity community about their take and their perspectives on things. So until next time, I'm your host, Timothy Montgomery, and this is an edition of New Cyber Frontier. Everybody stay safe, and until next.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.